character and research positionality. While contemporary scholarship in the humanities has widely embraced the declaration of partiality and situatedness on the level of the social agent, it has not yet done so at the level of the human being. This distinction will be discussed in more detail in Chapter 6. Here I will only provide a preliminary instance. The politics of positionality within any research has become increasingly apparent over the past few decades. Headed by feminist and post-colonial thought, it has become increasingly common to critique a research practice that presumes its gaze to be neutral, impartial, or objective, and to recognize that knowledge is necessarily situated. It comes from a particular situation, so we always have to question where knowledge is coming from. That's the idea of positionality and research positionality. For instance, the historical exclusion of women scientists in medical research has led to blind spots in many women's health issues, which are disproportionately under-researched in comparison to other areas of medical study. The problem of researcher bias has also been widely explored in the field of anthropology, where troves of documents exist chronicling Western observations of non-Western communities that are riddled with poor, decontextualized, and ultimately harmful interpretations of native culture and customs, many of which serve to justify and sustain colonial expansion. Bias is also demonstrated in recent advances in AI research, where facial recognition often fails to detect the faces of people of color or women in comparison to white men, and some AI systems have been shown to reproduce racial, homophobic, and misogynistic slurs. An analog can also be found in the field of physics. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle revealed that it is fundamentally impossible to have total knowledge about the state of a subatomic particle once the researcher begins to observe it. The act of observation itself makes it possible to only record a particle's position or velocity, but not both simultaneously. From this point on, a physicist becomes more implicated as one of the parameters of the experiment than previously assumed. Bringing the positionality of the researcher into the scope of the research itself is of both epistemological and ethical concern. Science is more accurate and more just when the observer is included in the observation and when the experimenter is included as one of the parameters of the experiment. When the gaze of the researcher is disregarded, it implies an epistemic stance that goes unquestioned. When a researcher turns a blind eye to the partiality of their own gaze and presumes it to be universal and unsullied by bias, they unwittingly undermine other possible epistemic positions. Remember, whenever you see the root word epistem, it has to do with knowledge. So epistemic positions, knowledge-based positions. Therefore, a common practice in the humanities, as well as in the natural sciences, is to declare the nature of the epistemic position of the researcher and their selected approach. However, the positionality of the researcher is often only considered at the level of the social agent, namely the position the researcher occupies in society in terms of broad social groupings such as gender, class, race, education level, nationality, ethnicity, neurotypicality or atypicality, etc. Transparency about social positionality plays a role in understanding a research outcome, but could it be useful to extend this to include character positionality? While my modern conscientious academic character declares her position to be partial within a society of individuals, the academic character itself passes undeclared as a partial character within the community of the self. So what I'm saying there, it's a really difficult distinction to draw out. Lately, it's become popular, and with good reason, for researchers to be a bit more transparent about who they are as researchers, where they're coming from, what their background is, in order to be a little bit more transparent about the angle from which they've approached their own research. So it turns out that there's lots of evidence showing that who we are, our social position in society, affects the kind of knowledge we produce, because it affects the perspective with which we're coming at data or experiment design and so on. So it's become a part of describing the sort of research you're doing to describe also who you are in a way, where you've been coming at this research from, your positionality. What I'm trying to point out here is that that positionality that is sometimes declared in academic situations is social positionality. It's declaring which point you might occupy in social space. But because the work we're looking at here is opening us up to thinking that even a singular human being might have a kind of personal diversity within them, well, who was I? What kind of character was I adopting at the time of doing this research could also be a kind of useful positionality to take note of. Was I the academic Katarina when I was writing this research? Or was I, the runner Katarina, the athletic Katarina? Presumably, different Katarinas can also produce different kind of research, just like different members of society can produce different kind of research. So should I also declare which Katarina I was? That's kind of what I'm getting at here. Should we also declare positionality at the level of the individual character as much as at the level of the social agent? So let's dig deeper into that. While my modern conscientious academic character declares her position to be partial within a society of individuals, the academic character itself passes undeclared as a partial character within the community of the self. With that, she hazards the very exclusion she hopes to mitigate, only now at the individual level. My academic character pledges herself to the pursuit of knowledge, yet she does not disclose, or even suppose, that the very adoption of the academic character in the first place has determined the kind of knowledge that I can produce. Just as social positionality produces partial knowledge, so does character positionality. As we have seen, far from being transparent, the academic character can bring to the research its own biases, exaggerations, and blindnesses. Who ought to be doing my thinking in this research? Should it be the runner character at the expense of the academic character, or the academic character at the expense of the runner character? Someone must be forsaken in the enterprise, after all. If a character is a frame of mind, what is the right frame of mind to adopt in the research project? My parents, Miloš and Slavica Ranković, similarly ask what are the optimal states of mind for thinking in their article and art proposal, Art in the Time of Contractions. Here the authors propose an art project that engages women in the early stages of labour to think speculatively about the future of humanity, asking whether we actually miss out on key insights when we dismiss thoughts had by people in extreme conditions, such as giving birth. And I quote from their proposal, "We wish to ask, who does this thinking and when do they do it? Is there a privileged state of mind, of emotions, of intellect, of personal affairs or repute to think the future? The history of Western thought is replete with guides on optimal thinking conditions. These rarely include such states as dodging mustard gas while sloshing through a bloodied trench or dodging neighbours' eyes on the way to a Black Maria. This is understandable, but is there something important lost on the way? Could some of these thoughts enrich the community's decision-making ahead of social reforms or acts of war? Could our thinking about the future be similarly enriched by those that literally experience the birth pangs of the future? Are the thoughts of women obscured or cleared in the state of labour? My answer to the question of which character ought to be doing the thinking in this PhD project is similar to the answer to which social agents should be active within fields of research. A white, male, upper-class perspective in research is not in and of itself a more accurate or inaccurate position from which to make knowledge. The inaccuracy, skewness, and subordination of the other within research fields to date come into play when research is dominated by any singular perspective. The answer to the question of social positionality in research is not to exclude the historically dominant position, but to diversify the positions that make up the community of research as a whole. Other positions variously come with their own blindnesses and biases to research, but they will also bring insights inaccessible to others. Diversity in the social positionality of the research community as a whole is what is desired, for the sake of epistemic wisdom as well as social justice. Conversely, let us consider the role of character positionality in research. When I make my coffee, open my laptop, and return to the document in which I'm writing my dissertation, it is within that little ritual that I have snapped into the academic character. I have not given thought prior to starting to write about which character to adopt when doing the research. Admittedly, even after all this work, the idea that I should take on a different character when doing my research can still sometimes sound absurd to me. But that may be the very force of habit that reinstates the academic character time and again in the office chair, writing the dissertation. Not very long ago, it was considered absurd and laughable that women should do academic research. So notions should not be dismissed just because they fall well outside of common sense. Common sense should always be regarded with suspicion by academics. The case study of my article, in which I overshot a critique of an existing model, provides just one example of the way in which the academic character can leave an artifact on the research output, a stylistic error produced by the force of habit. All characters leave their artifacts on our behaviours. All characters lead us to overshoot in certain directions of thought and behaviour and remain ignorant to others. If human beings, and so researchers, are always in character, this suggests that when left unquestioned or unexamined, certain character positions will dominate in the research and dominate its course in ways that may go undetected. These dominant character positions necessarily perform an erasure of knowledge that could have been generated by adopting other character positions. When I end my writing session and leave my laptop to go about my day, I will be a teacher, a student, a lover, an optimist, a cynic, a depressive, an initiator, a ruminator, a victim, a specialist, a layman, a negotiator, a hopeless romantic, a pragmatist, an artist, a daydreamer, a hungry animal, a responsible sister, an indulgent daughter, a crude joker, a loudmouth, an introvert, a Slav, an atheist, a moralist, a recluse, an attention seeker, a leader, a follower, a master, a beginner, an interpreter, a hothead, a pacifist, a gossip, a citizen, a listener, a crowd member, a protester, a supporter, a pencil pusher, a runner. What sort of knowledge would these characters produce if they were not omitted from the research? Here would be a good moment to remember that this is not even my or the academic character's idea, but the idea of the nameless tangential character in the Politics of Inner Self performance experiment. She is responsible for the ideas in this chapter. Therefore, while the academic character has shown its historical value by carrying with it a number of good habits, it may not be the only character I wish to consult in the research project. There are other characters that can think for me. Each one is enabling and limiting in its own way. I propose the answer to the question of character positionality within research to be the same as the answer to the question of social positionality: diversity. Diversity of positions, whether on the individual or the communal level, is an antidote to the inevitable blind spots that come with the condition of partial perspectives. Occasionally, adopting a different character in the space of research may then potentially enhance critical thinking and research rigour. Within this way of working with one's own characters, affordance and blindness are two sides of the same coin. There is no all-seeing perspective from which to think and write. Character is a kind of thought infrastructure, and changing this infrastructure from time to time enables new thoughts and perspectives to emerge. Bound up in the academic character is not only her voice, which can be read in these words, but also some of the paraphernalia that attend it, such as the aesthetics of the printed word on the clear white page. Hopefully, this discussion and disclosure of the partial nature of my current perspective enables us both, as author and reader, to avoid inadvertently giving primacy of interpretation to the printed letter, which carries with it connotations of the sincerity of academic character, as opposed to the characters in video performance, which bring with them connotations of pretense and falseness. My academic character can be placed alongside the panoply of other characters that feature in my performance-based work, on a level playing field with them. She is just one of the many frames of mind or characters in which to do my research. Maybe one of the reasons I came to the Academy to do my artistic research in the first place was to meet this academic character and learn who she was. In this chapter, we have begun to chart out a preliminary taxonomy of characters as they appeared in this research, and have chosen to refer to two special classes in particular: tethered characters and tangential characters. Tethered characters are bound to the social milieu through the expectations of other human beings and are restricted to being consistent in their public behaviours. Conversely, tangential characters are relatively free of such social binds and can be interchanged non-committally and inconsistently throughout a period of performance. They can also lead the human being on a tangent of expression inconsistent with the thoughts and behaviours of the tethered character or characters. A politics of inner self arises in the way in which expression time is distributed among the characters within one's possible range of expression. In the final section of the chapter, we began to consider how diversity of character within the human being endows it with multiple perspectives, just as a diversity of social agents within society endows that society with multiple perspectives. I considered how other characters besides the academic character could participate in the research. While this chapter introduced a distinction between tethered and tangential characters, the next chapter will explore another related distinction, that between the social agent and the human being. There I will further speculate on what possibilities might arise out of extending the notion of diversity to the individual human being, and consider what consequences a politics of inner self might have for politics on a societal level.